Gods walking the earth, floating orbs, and a giant walled city full of people with a magic disease. If any of that sounds cool to you, then you are in for a whole lot of cool. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Hello everybody, welcome to Thumb Together Funny Pages. My name is Andrew Fantasia, and today we're going to be talking about Elantris together. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and give some love to that subscribe button as well. Otherwise, the sickness will take me, and I'll be walled up behind a city where I can't make any more videos, and that would suck. Elantris is the first novel, it's the debut novel of Mr. Brandon Sanderson. This guy right here, and that guy right there. There he is. Brandon Sanderson is a name that kept creeping its way into my life, into my Google searches, into everything I did, because as an avid reader of fantasy and science fiction, I have been told that Brandon Sanderson is currently the king of the genre. He is the lord and master of modern fantasy, at least in the 21st century. And after dipping into his first book, I think that, it's hard to say right now if that's true, but I think it very well could be. For a first book, Elantris is pretty damn intense. Elantris takes place in a fantasy world whose name I can't quite remember, and that doesn't really matter. And in this world, there is a disease, and anybody can get it. Rich, poor, old, young, anybody can get it, and it creeps up on you. One day you wake up and you've got gray splotches all over your skin. You've been infected with this disease, and when that happens, no matter who you are, you get stripped of everything. They put like a white robe on you, they take off all your clothes, they remove your possessions, and they put you into this city called Elantris, and they lock the door behind you. And this city is full of these other people who have caught this disease, and what the disease does, it's a magic disease. It doesn't make you sick per se or injure you in any way, but it just kind of freezes you in time. You're kind of like a walking corpse. You can't age, you can't die of starvation, but you feel hungry. You can't die of pain, but you feel pain, and you never heal either. But you're just frozen. So like, for example, if I got a paper cut on my finger and I was in this city, I had this sickness, that paper cut would never heal. So I would feel that sting of that paper cut for the rest of eternity, for as long as I am in that city. And obviously this is a very hellish way to live. So a lot of people are just kind of laying in the street begging for death because, they have, maybe they hurt their knee, so they're in constant agony because their knee is hurting. Or maybe they pulled a muscle in their neck. Well, that muscle is constantly being pulled and it can never ever go away. And they're just living with that pain forever and ever, on top of the pain of hunger, and they can't do anything about it. So it's not a fun place. You don't want to go to Elantris, as pretty as the name sounds. The book follows three main characters, Raoden, Serene, and Hrathen. Raoden is the prince of this kingdom, and one morning he wakes up with the sickness, and prince or no prince, he is thrown into Elantris and forced to survive on his own in Elantris. Serene is a princess from a neighboring kingdom who was betrothed to Raoden. She comes over by boat at like the very beginning of the book, and she's like, "Hey, where's the prince at? I'm here to marry him." And they're like, he's dead. He's not around anymore. The king doesn't want to tell people that his son caught the disease because he wants to maintain like an air of power. So they just lie and say that the prince died in a tragic accident. So she doesn't realize her fiance is bumming around in this city trying to escape, and now she's stuck in a palace where she doesn't know anybody, and she's like, well, this sucks. And then the third character, Hrathen, is a priest from a very evil religious empire that tries to basically dominate all the other kingdoms. And Hrathen was sent to this kingdom by like the Pope dictator of his religion to sort of convert everybody. He's like a really, really antagonistic Jehovah's Witness. Instead of knocking on doors, he's going to kick down doors and be like, hey, guess what? You're part of my religion now. You don't like it? Tough. And the book proceeds to follow these three characters as they live out their separate lives. Raoden bumming around in this city, making friends with the other wretched people who live there and trying to eke out an existence in this almost post-apocalyptic little walled town he's found himself in. Serene is trying to basically play the Game of Thrones with the court and the nobility, because she's a stranger in a strange land and everybody's very set in their ways, but their ways aren't that great. So Serene sees this and is like, I think that there's room for improvement here. Let's make this a better place. And that constantly puts her in a position where she's butting heads with Hrathen, because Hrathen is trying to change the kingdom too, but to suit his own needs. So you've got these three characters that are constantly dancing around each other, and eventually, it takes a long time, but eventually the three characters actually start to meet up with one another, and that's when things get more interesting. Unlike typical modern fantasy, there is nothing super grim or super dark about Elantris. It's a very lighthearted tale. There's no swearing, there's no sex. This is a very dry, sexless kingdom. But, I mean, what are you going to do? There's also, though, and this is shocking for people, especially fantasy fans, very little combat and warfare. Most of the book is about politics and diplomacy. Serene is playing a diplomatic game with all the nobles in the court. Hrathen is trying to use, shady, quasi-illegal diplomacy to suit his religious means. And Raoden is trying to be diplomatic with the multiple gangs that run Elantris to try to form some kind of cohesive unit and make it easier to survive. Nobody is picking up a sword and charging into battle until literally maybe this point in the story. Really, really far into the story. That's when you start to see people with swords and bows and arrows and stuff, the typical fantasy stuff you might be used to. So if you're looking for something Lord of the Ringsy, if you're looking for something where a lot of knights pick up swords and go charging into battle to face off against enemies who also have swords, and there's a little sword action going on, Elantris might not be for you. That's just not the kind of fantasy that this is. Instead, it's about world building, it's about people, it's a very intimate look at these three characters. You really get to know Raoden and Hrathen and Serene very, very well. And of course, it's also full of some really nice, juicy world building, which a lot of fantasy fans, myself included, like. Now, Brandon Sanderson. Let's talk about him for a minute. Here's the thing about Brandon Sanderson. So far, I've only read this, and I'm about halfway into his other novel, Warbreaker. So there's a lot of Brandon Sanderson I still have to cover. I haven't read anywhere near his whole repertoire yet. But from what I've heard from other fantasy fans, Brandon Sanderson's whole deal is he's very big on magic systems, how the rules of magic work in the different worlds that he built. So in this book, the rules of magic are very complex. In the other one I'm reading, the rules of magic are very complex. There's a lot of minutia to it. It's almost like a mathematical game or an equation. It's like something you would see in a Dungeons and Dragons instruction manual. But thankfully, at least in this book anyway, that doesn't get in the way of the story. It never once gets in the way of the characters. I never once was reading this and thinking, I have to understand all the minutia of the magic system to understand the plot. Thankfully, Sanderson is smart enough to not do that. From what I hear, though, the more you get into his library of books, the more complex those magic systems become and the more important they become to the story. That has me a little worried, but I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to dive deeper and deeper into what Sanderson has written because I really like Elantris, and so far I'm liking his other book, Warbreaker, even more. Sanderson is also famous for creating something called the Cosmere. We're not going to get into it here. That's a whole other video for a whole other day. But in a nutshell, the Cosmere is, imagine the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but with fantasy books that all happen to take place in the same sort of magical galaxy. Something like that. So I'm really eager to dig into Sanderson's Cosmere, all the fantasy he's written. He's got tons more. Aside from this and Warbreaker, he's got 6 other books and then another 3 that are part of a series that's going to be 10 plus 3 more. And another, he is just cranking out these books once a week or something. It is crazy. But Elantris was his first, so I decided to start there. And if you want to get into Brandon Sanderson, I suggest starting here too. He is, so far, the 21st century fantasy author. So far. I'll see what I have to say when I get deeper into his library, but right now, I think the rumors are true. I think he is taking fantasy in the direction it needs to go for the new millennium. His characters talk like human beings, plain and simple. It's not like when you read Tolkien or when you read Jordan and all the characters are just talking liketh this because 'tis fantasy and therefore we cannot have emotions that are not over the top. No, everybody here talks like a normal friggin' person, and that makes it so much easier to get under the skin of these people and to get invested in what they're saying. Yes, George R.R. Martin is contributing to modern fantasy as well. Yes, his books are very well written and very contemporarily written compared to the other lords of fantasy. However, there's 2 problems with George R.R. Martin's books. Number 1, they're very, very adult and dark. And number 2, he writes 1 book every 17 years. Elantris can be read by anybody, all ages, no matter, as long as you can read, as long as this is at your level. There's nothing in here that's going to offend people who are easily offended. There's nothing in here that are going to traumatize children. Any age, you can read this book. And Brandon Sanderson cranks out books on a very quick schedule. So if you like this, by the time you're done reading it, he's probably already finished another book. You can go out and check that out too. So it's a great starting point for him. It's a great starting point for contemporary fantasy in general. If you want to get your kids reading fantasy, this is probably the best place to start. If they're done with Harry Potter, they want something a little bigger, this is the place to start, my friends. Then you can work your way up to Westeros. But I think that this is just as well written, and contains just as much beautiful lore and magic and world building and wonder to keep people wanting more. So that is Elantris. Thank you so much for watching. Next time, we're going to dive into another contemporary-ish fantasy, and this one's all cool and topical because guess what? HBO is making a series about it as we speak. Something's got to fill that Game of Thrones time slot. I'm talking, of course, about His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, and we're going to be looking at Book 1, The Golden Compass, next time right here. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I'm Andrew Fantasia, and I will see you in the funny pages.